world will note that the first atomic bomb was dropped on Hiroshima. Having found the bomb, we have used it. We shall continue to use it until we completely destroy Japan's power to make war.
The release of atom power has changed everything, Einstein said. With the development of nuclear weapons, man has acquired for the first time in history the technical means to destroy the whole of civilization in a single act. After the first and only use of nuclear weapons in history by the United States at the end of the World War II, the United Nations was created, with its first act being the establishment of a commission to deal with the problems raised from the discovery of atomic energy. The broad consensus was the nuclear science must never be used for destruction, but rather it has to be used for peaceful matters.
Against the dark background of the atomic bomb, the United States pledges before the world its determination to help solve the fearful atomic dilemma, to devote its entire heart and mind to find the way by which the miraculous inventiveness of man shall not be dedicated to his death, but consecrated to his life.
And so the Non-Proliferation Treaty, the NPT, was born, a treaty consisting of three main points. Everyone with the nuclear weapon would disarm. Everyone would agree not to proliferate any more nuclear weapons, and everyone would have the explicit right to develop a nuclear program for peaceful purposes. This treaty has now been signed by all but 4 countries in the world. The International Atomic Energy Agency, the IAEA, was created to monitor member state compliance and to help them develop peaceful nuclear programs. And the United Nations Security Council was designated as the enforcement arm of the treaty. And this is the treaty that is in the center of the dispute over Iran's nuclear program. Iran's nuclear program began in 1957 with US help through Atoms for Peace initiative. It signed the NPT and began building nuclear plants until 1979, when Khomeini took power and ended the program. The program was resumed with IAEA involvement in 1980s during the Iran and Iraq War until 2003. When amidst accusations that Iran has a secret nuclear weapons program, Iran volunteered to temporarily suspend all uranium enrichment and to sign additional protocols allowing even closer monitoring. The voluntary confidence-building measures were to continue for a proposed 6 months period till the IAEA could fully investigate the charges and the West could propose an agreement with objective ways Iran could satisfy the West that his program was truly peaceful. 6 months dragged on to 2 years, and despite the fact IAEA investigation concluded there was no evidence of a nuclear weapons program, the West never came up with ways Iran could prove its program was peaceful. Finally, they just proposed to an agreement and Iran would permanently cease enrichment, effectively giving up its right under the NPT. Of course, Iran refused this offer and resumed enriching under supervision of IAEA. This matter was then referred to United Nations Security Council, who ordered Iran to cease all enrichment. Iran refused, and ever since then, this standoff has been the central point of the contention, with Iran refusing to give up its right under the NPT and the West escalating sanctions and threatening direct military action against Iran for, quote, failing its international obligations. And what does the intelligence have to say about Iran's nuclear program? Since 2003, the IAEA has continuously reported that it has been able to verify the non-diversion to non-peaceful purposes of declared nuclear material in Iran, and with continued intensive monitoring has maintained that position to this day. Affirming the IAEA's reports are the national intelligence estimates. the most authoritative intelligence report in the United States, representing the consensus of all 16 of its intelligence agencies, who released reports in 2003, 2007, 2010, and 2012, affirming with high level of confidence that Iran currently has no nuclear weapons program. North Korea, India, Pakistan, and Israel are the only 4 nations in the world who have not signed the NPT, and all of them have nuclear weapons. Iran is a compliant signatory to the NPT under IAEA's supervision, and the intelligence indicates no nuclear weapons program. Yet, Israel and America are threatening to even use nuclear bombs against Iran for its failure to, quote, meet international obligations. A preemptive war to stop another weapons program that doesn't even exist. Last month, November 2013, Iran and 6 superpowers, the United States, Great Britain, France, Germany, Russia, and China, also known as P5+1, reached an interim deal with Iran to stop their nuclear weapons program.
Good evening. Today, the United States, together with our close allies and partners, took an important first step toward a comprehensive solution that addresses our concerns with the Islamic Republic of Iran's nuclear program. Since I took office, I've made clear my determination to prevent Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon. As I've said many times, my strong preference is to resolve this issue peacefully, and we've extended the hand of diplomacy. Yet, for many years, Iran's been unwilling to meet its obligations to the international community. So my administration worked with Congress, the United Nations Security Council, and countries around the world to impose unprecedented sanctions on the Iranian government. These sanctions have had a substantial impact on the Iranian economy, and with the election of a new Iranian president earlier this year, an opening for diplomacy emerged. I spoke personally with President Rouhani of Iran earlier this fall. Secretary Kerry has met multiple times with Iran's foreign minister, and we have pursued intensive diplomacy, bilaterally with the Iranians and together with our P5+1 partners, the United Kingdom, France, Germany, Russia, and China, as well as the European Union. Today, that diplomacy opened up a new path toward a world that is more secure, a future in which we can verify that Iran's nuclear program is peaceful and that it cannot build a nuclear weapon. While today's announcement is just a first step, it achieves a great deal. For the first time in nearly a decade, we have halted the progress of the Iranian nuclear program, and key parts of the program will be rolled back. Iran has committed to halting certain levels of enrichment and neutralizing part of its stockpiles. Iran cannot use its next-generation centrifuges, which are used for enriching uranium. Iran cannot install or start up new centrifuges, and its production of centrifuges will be limited. Iran will halt work at its plutonium reactor, and new inspections will provide extensive access to Iran's nuclear facilities and allow the international community to verify whether Iran is keeping its commitments. These are substantial limitations which will help prevent Iran from building a nuclear weapon. Simply put, they cut off Iran's most likely paths to a bomb. Meanwhile, this first step will create time and space over the next 6 months for more negotiations to fully address our comprehensive concerns about the Iranian program. And because of this agreement, Iran cannot use negotiations as cover to advance its program. On our side, the United States and our friends and allies have agreed to provide Iran with modest relief while continuing to apply our toughest sanctions. We will refrain from imposing new sanctions, and we will allow the Iranian government access to a portion of the revenue that they have been denied through sanctions. But the broader architecture of sanctions will remain in place, and we will continue to enforce them vigorously. And if Iran does not fully meet its commitments during this 6-month phase, we will turn off the relief and ratchet up the pressure. Over the next 6 months, we will work to negotiate a comprehensive solution. We approach these negotiations with a basic understanding. Iran, like any nation, should be able to access peaceful nuclear energy. But because of its record of violating its obligations, Iran must accept strict limitations on its nuclear program that make it impossible to develop a nuclear weapon. In these negotiations, nothing will be agreed to unless everything is agreed to. The burden is on Iran to prove to the world that its nuclear program will be exclusively for peaceful purposes. If Iran seizes this opportunity, the Iranian people will benefit from rejoining the international community, and we can begin to chip away at the mistrust between our two nations. This would provide Iran with a dignified path to forge a new beginning with the wider world based on mutual respect. If, on the other hand, Iran refuses, it will face growing pressure and isolation. Over the last few years, Congress has been a key partner in imposing sanctions on the Iranian government, and that bipartisan effort made possible the progress that was achieved today. Going forward, we will continue to work closely with Congress. However, now is not the time to move forward on new sanctions, because doing so would derail this promising first step, alienate us from our allies, and risk unraveling the coalition that enabled our sanctions to be enforced in the first place. That international unity is on display today. The world is united in support of our determination to prevent Iran from developing a nuclear weapon. Iran must know that security and prosperity will never come through the pursuit of nuclear weapons. It must be reached through fully verifiable agreements that make Iran's pursuit of nuclear weapons impossible. As we go forward, the resolve of the United States will remain firm, as will our commitments to our friends and allies, particularly Israel and our Gulf partners, who have good reason to be skeptical about Iran's intentions. Ultimately, only diplomacy can bring about a durable solution to the challenge posed by Iran's nuclear program. As President and Commander-in-Chief, I will do what is necessary to prevent Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon. But I have a profound responsibility to try to resolve our differences peacefully, rather than rush towards conflict. Today, we have a real opportunity to achieve a comprehensive, peaceful settlement, and I believe we must test it. The first step that we've taken today marks the most significant and tangible progress that we've made with Iran since I took office. And now we must use the months ahead to pursue a lasting and comprehensive settlement that would resolve an issue that has threatened our security and the security of our allies for decades. It won't be easy, and huge challenges remain ahead. But through strong and principled diplomacy, the United States of America will do our part on behalf of a world of greater peace, security, and cooperation among nations. Thank you very much.
The nuclear crisis within Iran has a significant effect on the global economy. For one, Iran's economy is fueled heavily on its oil exportation. Being the fourth largest exporter of oil in the world, the significance is fairly hard to spot. Because of sanctions placed by the United States and also sanctions from the European Union, Iran's oil exportation has fallen from 2.5 million barrels per day to simply 1 million barrels per day. Less oil on the world market means a smaller supply, and a smaller supply means increased oil prices for everyone. Higher oil prices are never good for business, whether domestically or abroad. Manufacturing, transportation, and even economic slowdowns are all dependent on the current price of oil. When the price of oil starts to increase sharply, it takes away the wealth that the everyday consumer could possibly use. Not only does it make the consumer spend more money on the oh-so-obvious gas and heating costs, but it also drives up the price of everyday goods. Because of the nuclear crisis, doing business with certain nations could become fairly tricky. If either Iran or Israel decide to take up arms, many nations may soon find themselves fighting amongst one another. Wars are never a good thing for business because they generally lead to heavy sanctions and even embargoes. Any product that may need to be transported through or around Iran would be nearly impossible, and which would further drive up the cost of goods. Because of the geographical position of Iran, a nuclear crisis would slow down trade within the entire region. Many goods that come through from Africa and Europe and crossing to and from Asia usually come through Iran. If a company that is accustomed to shipping through Iran must reroute, not only would that cost money, but it could also waste time and add unneeded stress to a business logistical run. Global security within this region is also a major factor that ties in with this current nuclear crisis. The area that surrounds Iran is already highly volatile, and if the nuclear crisis were to get out of hand, it could potentially trigger other crises that are already at a standstill. It would almost be like a domino effect, whereas because one country decides to go to war, other nations could spiral out of control and follow suit. Wars are extremely costly, and considering that many nations are currently struggling with many debts, a nuclear crisis will be the last thing that any nation needs to worry about. If a nation starts putting large amounts of money into a war, that will mean that there are less funds to be allocated to business. Less money for business means less employment, and less employment leads to the economy struggling further.